States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As all members have received a copy of the call for tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted.
You're all set? You want to take your bag off?
As all members have received the proposed minutes of our September 19 meeting, the reading of those proposed minutes will be omitted. Are there any proposed changes to those minutes?
Okay.
Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes as presented stand adopted upon unanimous consent. Steve Anderson, Chairman of the Board of Education. Oh, we have no microphone?
Okay, speak up. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Board of Ed budget 2012-2013 starts up in a few weeks. Between November 9th and December 22nd, the board will be holding 6 meetings, 3 of them which will be solely focused on the budget. Our 3 budget-only meetings, all of which are at Coscob School, kick off Wednesday, November 9th, 7 p.m. with the superintendent's budget presentation. We also have budget-only meetings on Tuesday, November 29th, and Thursday, December 8th. Add in a regular board meeting on Thursday, November 17th, a regular work session on Thursday, December 1st, and a regular board meeting on Thursday, December 22nd, at which we will finalize any budget changes. At that December 22nd meeting, we will vote a budget forward. The public will have time to speak about the budget to the board at 5 of these 6 meetings. There's no public speaking in our December 1st work session. Like last year, we strongly encourage your early input in the board's budget process. As we work through various add and subtract desires, the earlier the input, the better, deeper, and richer the discussion and the decision-making can be. All budget documents will be online. All Q&A will be online. We look forward to your participation in the process of building our Board of Ed budget. Thank you.
Thank you. David Ormsby, Chair of the Nathaniel Witherell Board.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. Item 3 asked for an opportunity to address you on the subject of Nathaniel Witherell.
Can't hear you.
All right, I'm sorry, Mr. Ormsby. Why don't we have sent someone to look for the custodian to see if we can find the microphone. Pardon me? All right, why don't you come up here and use the...
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. Item 3 had asked for the opportunity to address you on the subject of Nathaniel Witherell's Project Renew. In my naivete, we had hoped that this would be helpful to your understanding of project to the detail of our plans. I now realize that the request has resulted in a major distraction from the substance of Project Renew. In addition to raising procedural issues, it has been asserted by some that it represents an unfair advantage over those who may disagree with us. Nathaniel Witherell does not seek an unfair advantage, nor, in my judgment, does it need an unfair advantage. The board of Nathaniel Witherell has decided instead to hold a series of public hearings at various times and locations convenient to RTM members and its various committees. Those public meetings, which will occur after the November 21 vote of the BET and before your December meeting, will provide those in attendance with an opportunity to discuss with representatives of Nathaniel Witherell and representatives of the Town Building Committee, Project Renew, and will provide question and answer periods. I urge you to attend, and for this reason I have requested that the moderator remove item 3 from the call of this meeting. I apologize for any inconvenience that may represent to you. Thank you.
Bob May, Chairman of District 12.
Mr. Moderator, town officials, members, and guests. On October 4th, the members of District 12 lost a former member and friend with the passing of Emil Benny Benvenuto. A lifelong resident of Greenwich, he was educated in the public school system. He served in the U.S. Army and later in life would be appointed Deputy Commissioner of Veterans Affairs in the Weicker administration. Then he was a local businessman and entrepreneur, owning such enterprises as the Benvenuto Real Estate Investment Company, Benny Says Liquor Mart, and he was a partner in Lusinger Steakhouse. He was a member of the Knights of Columbus, American Legion, American Legislative Exchange Council, National Conference of Insurance Legislators, Greenwich Council on Youth and Drugs, and served on the board of the Greenwich Boys and Girls Club. Active in local politics, Benny was elected to the Connecticut State Legislature in 1976 and served for 6 terms representing the 151st District. He was also elected to a term in the State Senate from the 36th District. At the State House, Benny served on the Insurance and Real Estate Committee, the Executive and Legislative Nominating Committee, and the Regulations Review Committee. As a legislator, he also co-chaired committees which selected Connecticut's first Inspector General, proposed the Lemon Law, and helped sponsor legislation enabling the town to purchase the Coscob Power Plant. In his spare time, he enjoyed reading and racing harness horses. Late in his long career of community service, Benny joined RTM District 12. Serving for 3 terms, he brought with him a wealth of experience. His wisdom and counsel will be missed by district members and the community. District 12 proposes the following resolution. Be it resolved that, whereas Emil Benvenuto was a lifelong resident of Greenwich, Connecticut, who served his community as a member of many local organizations, and whereas Emil Benvenuto was a local businessman and entrepreneur, founding several well-known, successful enterprises in town, and whereas Emil Benvenuto served his community as an elected representative to the Connecticut State Legislature for multiple terms, and whereas Emil Benvenuto served in town government as a member of RTM District 12, now therefore let it be resolved that this meeting recognize the contributions that Emil Benvenuto has made to the town of Greenwich and observe a moment of silence in his honor. Be it further resolved that this resolution be spread upon the minutes of this meeting and that a suitable copy be given to his family.
Will the members please rise and join me in a moment of silence in memory of Emil Benvenuto. Thank you. Mr. Anderson, I'm going to invite you to, if you could repeat with the use of the microphone.
We'll run through the dates again. Board of Education budget 2012-2013 starts up in a few weeks. Between November 9th and December 22nd, the board will be holding 6 meetings, 3 of which will be solely focused on the budget. Our 3 budget-only meetings, all of which are at Cos School, kick off Wednesday, November 9th at 7 p.m. with the superintendent's budget presentation. We also have budget-only meetings on Tuesday, November 29th and Thursday, December 8th. Add in a regular board meeting on Thursday, November 17th, a regular work session on Thursday, December 1st, and a regular board meeting on Thursday, December 2nd, at which we finalize any budget changes. At the December 22nd meeting, we will vote a budget forward. The public will have time to speak about the budget to the board at 5 of these 6 meetings. There's no public speaking in our December 1st work session. Like last year, we strongly encourage your early input in the board's budget process. As we work through various adds and subtract desires, the earlier the input, the better, deeper, and richer the discussion and the decision-making can be. All budget documents will be online. All Q&A will be online. We look forward to your participation in the process of building our Board of Ed budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who had contacted me about speaking at the beginning? All right, that now brings us to the call for tonight's meeting. I had alerted all committee chairs and district chairs that given the short agenda tonight, that there would be no consent calendar. I will recommend a motion to suspend the rules to combine the following items, 1 and 2, dealing with the Community Development Block Grant, and item 6, the acceptance of the police motorcycle, which would leave items 4 and 5 to be considered separately, item 3 having been withdrawn. So, is there a motion to suspend the rules to combine items 1, 2, and 6 for voting purposes? The motion to suspend the rules is not debatable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. All those in favor of combining items 1, 2, and 6 for voting purposes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. So items 1 and 2, we'll take them together now come before us. Princess Urfe, Director of the Community Development Block Grant Program.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening. Item number 1 is the resolution of the Board of Estimate and Taxation authorizing the proposed budget for the Community Development Block Grant Program during program year 2012. The anticipated funding for 2012 is $963,718. Item number 2 is the resolution of the Representative Town Meeting authorizing the first selectman to apply for and accept Community Development Block Grant funding from HUD for program year 2012. Okay.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of those 2 resolutions? Resolutions on items 1 and 2 are now before us, and pursuant to statute, I will at this point open a public hearing on those 2 items. May we have the reports of the committees that considered those items? We will begin with our Health and Human Services report and its chairman, Karen Fosliotis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. A motion was made and seconded by the HHS committee to combine items 1 and 2 for voting purposes. That motion was approved 11-0-0, so we discussed the 2 items together. Princess Urfe, Director of the CDBG, then appeared before the committee to answer questions with respect to the Community Development Block Grant Program. She noted that there was an advisory committee consisting of 24 individuals, and the HHS committee, Alexis Bulgaris, Bill Van Brick, and Samar Panatam of the HHS committee were among the 24 members of the CDBG committee. The committee received 39 applications, and the Round Hill Community Services application was found to be ineligible because it did not meet the low-income test. Ms. Urfe noted that the CDBG funding is decreasing each year, and it is becoming harder to decide who is to receive funding. Alma Rutgers was the chair of the committee for the first time, and it was a learning experience for the entire committee, but they did get through it. This year, the program received at least 10% less than last year, so they had to decrease the amounts allocated, and they did so proportionately. It was also noted that next year they anticipate $825,000 from grant money. They also anticipate $37,000 from program income on Parsonage Cottage, and $100,000 is available for reallocation from last year for a total of $963,000. One member noted that there is a $172,000 in administration costs, which appeared to them to be high, and was then asked Mr. Urfe how this compares to other towns. Ms. Urfe noted that the administration cost, which is found on page 117 of the report, is for supplies, fringe benefits, and for the salaries of 2 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff. She noted that the administrative costs are capped at 20% by federal law of the total money, and the program did not have any major increases for administrative costs, with the exception for fringe benefits, which rose from $32,000 to $41,000, and there apparently is contribution by the town. New agencies to the program were the Connecticut Legal Services, who provide legal support services for foreclosure prevention and domestic violence. Other programs include a counselor and training program, and there was an allocation to the YMCA for phase 3 of the rehabilitation of their daycare center. The committee voted to approve items 1 and 2 and recommend these items to the full body of the RTM by a vote of 11-0-0 with District 5 absent.
Thank you. Irv Porter, Vice Chair of our Finance Committee.
I would add just a few comments, Mr. Moderator. On behalf of the Finance Committee, the vote of the Finance Committee, which considered both items 1 and 2 in tandem, was 12-0-0. Princess Urfe did an extraordinary job in explaining each of the items. In general, I would say that the discussion on the items was limited, since most members on the Finance Committee are quite familiar with the issues, and Princess Urfe's skills were extraordinary in explaining them. But there were 4 points that are in addition to what the previous speaker said that I bring to your attention. The numbers for 2012 are $825,000, which comes in from HUD, plus another $100,000 of reprogram funds from 2010, plus $38,700 of annual loan repayments. And this produces for the coming year, or the current year, $963,718. There are no downside risks or restraints to the town. The priorities of the community block grants are focused on children and their specific needs, as you heard from the previous speaker. Finally, the recent history of funding and the oversight of recent grants was discussed, and I think all the members of the body are familiar with the way the system works. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kip Bergweger, Vice Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, the Legislative and Rules Committee met last Monday night at the Evaristo Room with all districts present. We considered items 1 and 2 together, and Princess Urfe was there to help. We made 1 substantive amendment and 2 typographical or grammatical amendments. I can describe those now, Mr. Moderator, or
thank you.
Yes. In the 3rd paragraph of item 1, the first 3 lines read, whereas the said policy provides that the Board of Estimate and Taxation shall submit proposed appropriations and make such appropriations as may appear advisable. But the BET does not make appropriations, so we modified this to state that appropriations shall be made by the RTM. So the exact language is to insert in the 2nd line, after the words appropriations and, the words the RTM shall, so that the first 3 lines would then read, whereas the said policy provides that the Board of Estimate and Taxation shall submit proposed appropriations, and the RTM shall make such appropriations as may appear advisable. In the last paragraph of item 1, a grammatical change, we inserted a comma after the 2nd line of the word budget. In item 2, the 1st paragraph, at the end of the 6th line and beginning of the 7th line, at the end of the sixth line are the words final 2012, and after that we inserted the word CDBG, so that from the end of the sixth line and beginning of the seventh line, it reads final 2012 CDBG annual one-year action plan. We put that in because that was the title of the document. And our vote on legal order on items 1 and 2 as amended was 12-0-0. And on behalf of the Legislative Rules Committee, I would now move that those amendments be adopted.
Thank you. That being a motion on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. We can adopt motions to amend upon unanimous consent. Is there any objection to those three proposed changes to items 1 and 2? Hearing none, that motion to amend is adopted upon unanimous consent. All right, this is a public hearing. Discussion on items 1 and 2. Yes.
Mr. Kaiser is passing out political information, trying to get people to vote. Is that appropriate?
I know of no prohibition although we do have a rule. I will remind our members, we do have a rule that members are strongly recommended to sit in their districts. So that might be the only rule that applies, but I'll ask the Sergeant at Arms to take that under consideration. Thank you. All right, further discussion on items 1 and 2. Item 6, and I will leave the public hearing open until we have finished with item 6, which is part of the combined item. So item 6 now comes before us. Peter Tessie, our first selectman.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, and ladies and gentlemen of the RTM. Item 6, resolved that the Greenwich Police Department accept a 2012 Harley-Davidson Electric Glide Police motorcycle, approximate value $20,000, awarded to the Greenwich Police Department by America's 9/11 Foundation.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? Resolution on item 6 has been moved and seconded. Evan Delman, Chair of our Town Services Committee.
Good evening. We met, discussed this item. The police officer that was part of the ride, his name was drawn from a hat, one of 2 in the country. We won the bike. We voted 7-0-0, districts 2, 3, 8, 10, and 12 absent.
Thank you. Any other committees take up this item? All right, discussion on item 6. Once again, I will call for any discussion on the Community Development Block Grant items. Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and ask the district chairs to please mark your voting cards, combined items 1, 2, and 6, and proceed to poll your delegation. While we are voting, we will continue. Item 4 now comes before us. May we have that resolution? Irv Porter, District 6.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Item 4 reads, resolved that it is the sense of this meeting that candidates for moderator and moderator pro tempore for the 2012 and 2013 representative town meeting may, I underline the word may, file their names with a brief statement of their qualifications with the town clerk on or before noon, December 23rd, 2011, for inclusion in the call of the January 2010 meeting. At an appropriate time, I would make further comments, Mr. Moderator, in support of the motion. Thank you.
Are you submitting a substitute resolution to change that 2010 date to 2012?
I believe that Legislative and Rules would like to make that motion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution?
So moved.
Resolution on item 4 has been moved and seconded. Kip Bergwager, Vice Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
This item came to us by way of petition signed by at least 20 members of the RTM. It's to encourage any candidate that intends to run for moderator or moderator pro tem next year to provide the RTM with a statement of his or her qualifications for that position. When we reviewed this item, we first noted that the date was 2010 instead of 2012, and we did move to unanimously to revise that date. Our member from District 10 was uncomfortable with proceeding with this item without getting further information. We particularly were interested in the similar resolution that the Explanos described as having been adopted in the mid-90s, and that member also wished to have an opportunity to review Robert's Rules of Orders to see if this matter conflicted with that. His principal concern was the effect of a sense of the meeting resolution adopted by this RTM that would purport to act at the next RTM, which will be a newly elected body. Although the members of the Legislative and Rules Committee believe that the proposed resolution was well intended, the members of the committee identified a variety of issues. One issue was whether the resolution was compulsory. Even though the clear language of the resolution states that candidates may file statements, some committee members felt that may could be interpreted as shall. Others felt that it might be ineffectual because it was not mandatory. Some committee members felt that if there was a deadlock at the RTM meeting in January, this requirement of a statement could inhibit spontaneous nominations from the floor. Some committee members were doubtful whether a sense of the meeting resolution adopted by a current RTM could apply to a subsequent RTM. Others noted that it wouldn't be binding in any case because it could be ignored. While this was a lot of difference of opinions on the effectiveness of the resolution, so we did adopt the amendment changing the date to 2012, and on the vote on legal order as revised, the vote was 8-3-1, with districts 8, 10, and 12 voting no, District 5 abstaining because she had signed the petition. I neglected to note that we had also voted on a motion by the member from District 10 to postpone this matter pending obtaining further information. And the vote on that was 4 in favor, 7 opposed, and District 1 abstaining. We then voted on the merits. The vote on the merits was 3-8-1, with Districts 2, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 voting no, and District 5 abstaining.
All right, so you are moving to amend on behalf of the committee the date 2010 to 2012.
I so move.
All right. That motion to amend is now before us. Is there any objection to that motion? Hearing none, and absent objection, that motion to amend item 4 is adopted upon unanimous consent. Discussion on item 4. Mr. Porter, District 6.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Karen Sadiq Khan and I prepared this item, and it is as it appears on the call. In September, the Finance Committee was given a copy of the resolution, which was intended to be given to each one of the district representatives, and an email version was sent to the district's chairs prior to their district meetings. Remember that the Finance Committee meets on Monday, and districts meet on Wednesday and Thursday, so there was limited time in that regard. At the September meeting, the resolution was also given to the district chairs to collect signatures. Adequate signatures were collected in order to place the item on the call. This is a common sense issue. It's that simple. And I would hope that my reputation and Karen Sadiq Khan's reputation would speak for itself with regard to how we conduct ourselves in this body, number one. And number two, that in order to conduct ourselves effectively and efficiently, it's appropriate for us to know what the intentions are and the qualifications are of those that intend to lead us. Based upon my research, which reflects the past 15 or 20 years, I did not go back any further than that. There's one a case when the moderator was it was suggested by the group, I would say suggested rather than imposed upon the moderator or moderator candidates to indicate what their qualifications and their intentions were. There's no similar precedent that I could find in that 15 to 20 year history for the moderator pro tem. Our best estimate, maybe somebody has additional information, please hold that for now if you would, and then you could, some of you with longer and more distinguished service than I can clarify that. My count on new members of the RTM, based upon the turnover that we've had this year, is that for the first meeting in January 2002, we'll have at least 20% new members. And if you remember the vote last year for the moderator pro tem, it was too close to call. The rules of the RTM specify that the moderator and the moderator pro tem be elected at the January meeting. I don't know, Mr. Moderator, if you have given an indication to this body as to whether or not this is in accordance with Robert's rules, but if you haven't, at the end of my comments, I would ask that you opine on that. Without knowing the qualifications of the candidates for these positions and presuming that they're going to be people that are incumbents, that they're not people that are necessarily going to be running for either of those offices the first time out of the box, it just seems that it would be more appropriate, more prudent if we knew what our leadership was all about. So it is that common sense approach that we encourage all of you to consider this. We carefully chose the word may rather than shall, so as to not impose. And that's really a question of semantics. If whomever it is that intends to run for either one of these positions knows the difference between may and shall, so be it. But if they don't, if the sense of the meeting resolution is worded in either way, and they intend to be the leader of our group or the assistant leader of our group, it seems to us that it would be prudent to adopt it as proposed. But you've tightened that up already by saying shall, which I take as a signal from you that you support, you endorse the proposal. Thank you.
Further discussion on item 4.
Mr. Moderator?
Paul Curtis, District 9.
Moderator, point of information.
Please state your point of information.
The statement was made that the resolution been amended to shall from may. I believe that's incorrect, or am I wrong?
That has not occurred.
Thank you.
Mr. Curtis.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen and colleagues in the RTM, our rules are very specific. Our rules state in Section 252 and in the Charter, Section 173, that nominees for moderator and moderator pro tem shall be made from the floor of the RTM and seconded. So this would be in addition to what we already have in our rules. I just wanted to clarify that point for Mr. Porter.
Further discussion on item 4. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 4, and proceed to poll your delegation. I have the result of the vote on the combined items. Those were items 1 and 2, the Community Development Block Grant, and item 6, the acceptance of a motorcycle. Those in favor, 134, opposed 0, abstaining 3. The combined items have carried. Item 5 now comes before us. May we have that resolution? Nancy Kale of the Board of Education.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Kale, a member of the Board of Education and member of the 3-person negotiations committee. Item number 5 reads as follows. Resolved that the representative town meeting of the town of Greenwich hereby approves the agreement between the Board of Education and the Greenwich Education Association representing teachers for the period July 1st, 2012 to June 30th, 2015.
Thank you. Will the member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 5 has been moved and seconded. May we have the reports on this item, beginning with our Labor Contracts Committee report and its chairman, David Denchen.
The negotiations for this contract were carried out on behalf of the town by a negotiating team representing the Board of Education, assisted by Alcaba, the town's labor negotiator. The team actually established a list of issues and topics that they would like to address in the negotiations, and among those topics were performance pay, work rules, addressing the issue of the Cadillac tax on healthcare plans that's coming up under the new healthcare legislation. But then later felt compelled to drop a number of these issues in the course of the negotiations as the dynamics of the negotiations got underway. Your Labor Contracts Committee met with the members of the negotiating team prior to the negotiations and made the following 3 points. An important factor in achieving broad support within the RTM, we suggested, was for the new contract to have at least 1 year of 0% GWI, whether with or without step increases, especially since the GEA previously had not agreed previously to a GWI, a zero GWI in the past, even though they've been asked to do so. In addition, we suggested that most members of the RTM would expect a significant restraint in the GWI in the remaining years of the contract, preferably at 2% or lower. And finally, we noted that it would be especially desirable for there to be a restructuring of the health insurance plan for the Greenwich teachers in order to achieve significant cost savings for the town, especially since teachers comprise such a large percentage of the town's employees. Significantly, other members of the town's leadership conveyed much the same message to the negotiating team, and we find it encouraging that the team was able to come very close to achieving all of these high priority goals in the course of these negotiations. The one exception, obviously, is the fact that in years 2 and 3, the GWI is at 2.5% rather than 2% or so. But there will be no step increases in those 2 years. The decision by the Board of Education's negotiating team to agree to the 2.5% GWI in those years was a concession that was made as part of a negotiated package with the GEA to achieve the restructuring of the health care insurance costs, with the result that we should end up with significant savings in health care costs that will vastly exceed the incremental costs of having the GWI at 2.5% as opposed to 2%. As a consequence, the Labor Contracts Committee met on 26 September with representatives of the negotiating team for the BOE and with Alcaba, and we voted unanimously to recommend approval of the negotiated contract with the GEA, and that contract has already, of course, been ratified by the membership of the GEA by a very significant margin. The 2 alternates on the Labor Contracts Committee were also there and noted that if they had been voting, they also would have voted to recommend approval of the contract by the RTM tonight. Obviously, I have no interest in reciting what's in the explanos, but I do want to emphasize that these concessions on the GWI in years 2 and 3 and the implementation of this health plan should allow the town to achieve an annual decline in health care costs from a current actual base of a little over $16 million in 2011-2012 down to about $13 million in 2014-2015. In the explanos, you'll see a graph there of the estimated cost savings. That's actually a fairly conservative graph. If in fact this plan had not been adopted and we would still have had the teachers under the same program as currently, those healthcare costs might have risen to as much as $20 million by the time we had gotten to the end of this contract term. That's in comparison with the anticipated $13 million that we hope to achieve. One of the other positive developments that came out of this negotiation is further evidence of the degree to which the labor negotiators for the Board of Education are working very closely with the labor negotiator for the town and the Human Resources Department to achieve gains in the labor negotiations with the employees under the supervision of the Board of Education. It's fairly clear that the level of communication and cooperation between the Board of Education and the town's labor negotiator and HR have improved significantly over the last several rounds of negotiations. And I certainly think that the Board of Education deserves credit for their willingness to see that while it's important to preserve the quality of education in town, cost factors are clearly important at this time. And I certainly hope that the BET and the RTM take that into account in terms of what the impact of future budgetary matters are on the Board of Education. We understand that there may be some that are concerned that the negotiating team may have done too good a job. The fact is, we're aware of the impact of the freeze in the STEP, and indeed we discussed it in the course of our meeting. The fact is, 40% of all the teachers are in the top 2 steps, and this freeze of the steps in years 2 and 3 would have or will have an impact really on the teachers who are on lower levels. And clearly there's some concern that that might induce some teachers to leave. We discussed this, as I say, in the meeting, and it's obviously our opinion only, but we believe that this is not likely to be the case. First, the teachers ratified this overwhelmingly. They could have various reasons for why they did approve it, but we strongly suspect that there isn't a significant number of them that thought that the contract was terribly repressive or abhorrent. Secondly, the increase of 2.5% in the wage level is roughly in line with increases that have been around the state in other contracts, albeit not for teachers. The fact is, Greenwich is usually the first in line on teacher negotiations, and it's certainly possible that our negotiations here and the results of those negotiations will be the trendsetter for the town, and it's quite possible that other towns in this part of the state will end up with the same level of wage increases. Third, because of the fairly high level of pay in this town for teachers in comparison with other towns in this part of the state, we don't think that a wage freeze for these 2 years is likely to have a major impact on the attractiveness of teaching in Greenwich. Let me make one last observation, and that is about the explanos that you've received in regard to this contract. And indeed, the explanos that you get for every labor contract. I do that because we received last month some suggestions, a suggested format on how the explanos ought to be set up for these labor contract negotiations, and we also received some suggestions on what questions we ought to ask the negotiating team for the town about the results of the negotiations. Let me point out that the Labor Contracts Committee does not prepare the explanos for this or any other labor contract. Rather, the explanos are prepared by the town officials who in fact negotiated the contract. And whether that's Alcava or whether that's the negotiators for the Board of Education. In preparing those explanos, those individuals endeavor to lay out to the members of the RTM the information and figures and data which were relevant to the negotiation of that particular contract and were the factors leading the Board of Education's negotiators or the town negotiator to take the negotiating positions that they did and to, in the end, to agree on whatever it is they agreed to. The explanos are intended to provide the members of the RTM with the information needed to decide whether the contract is one that should or should not be approved. The Labor Contracts Committee believes that it's appropriate for those explanos to be limited in their scope to helping the RTM with information needed to vote up or down the specific contract before it. That being said, the Labor Contracts Committee does regularly discuss with the Board of Education's negotiators and with the town negotiator various aspects of the explanos and whether there is certain additional information that ought to be included in the explanos to assist all of us here at the RTM in making the decision whether the contract is appropriate. And we discussed with them the suggested format that we had received in September. Indeed, you may well note that in the explanos this time around there is some additional information, and that is a result of the conversations we had with the negotiating team. As it is, when we looked at the suggested format we got last month, we collectively came to the conclusion that the format that was given to us was actually better suited for a financial analysis of negotiations going forward. In other words, they're better suited to review what should or should not be the negotiating strategy of the town in these kinds of labor contracts at the start of the negotiations, rather than as an analysis of what's already been negotiated. We certainly think that there's nothing wrong with collecting the data, and there's nothing wrong with discussing that data with the negotiators for the town prior to the opening of negotiations. We simply have to keep in mind that we as an RTM are not in a position to tell the Board of Education or the town negotiator what it is he should be negotiating or what his negotiating strategy should be. I think a number of you over the weekend may well have gotten a new format, which is a revised format. We on the Labor Contracts Committee haven't had time to look at that. We haven't met to discuss it. We are encouraged that that's now been reduced to a single page. That was one of our suggestions, that it ought to be simplified and made more compact. But we haven't had time to discuss it, and we'll take it up at a later point. In any event, as previously noted, the Labor Contracts Committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of this contract with the GEA.
Bob Brady, Chair of our Education Committee.
Good evening. The Education Committee met at 8 p.m. Monday, October 17th in the Hayton Room. Excuse me. All districts were represented. Board of Ed members Peter Scheer, Nancy Kale, Mike Bodson, and Board of Ed HR Director Bob Lichtenfeld, his assistant Regina Williams, and Labor Contracts Committee member Joan Caldwell assisted us. Peter Scheer presented the proposed agreement. It covers the certified teaching staff and is for a 3-year term from July 1, 2012 through June 30th, 2015. The Board of Ed's principal goal was to minimize contract cost. Work rules, pay for performance, management flexibility were all secondary goals, and in the event were sacrificed to achieving the low contract cost. The contract negotiations did go to mediation. The contract appears to achieve a low rate of cost increase, approximately 0.9% a year over the 3 years, average per year. The contract cost has two major components: compensation, which is made up of step pay levels and changes to the amount paid at each step, and a healthcare insurance premium expense. For the purpose of the cost projections, 857 employees, which includes grant employees, were used for total wages, and 918 to calculate the healthcare component. There are presently 833 full-time equivalents on staff, and the fiscal 12 budget was based on 818 employees. So there are lots of different numbers out there. The overall projected contract cost increase is about 0.9% of a year over the 3 contract years. However, this is comprised of a 2.4% average annual increase of the wage components and a 7.3% average annual decrease in the town's healthcare component. The general wage increase in the first year is 0, but there are longevity step increases. In the second and third year, personnel will be frozen in their steps, but there will be 2.5% general wage increases in each of those 2 years. Other adjustments were made to coaching stipends, tuition reimbursement allowances, and other teacher duty reimbursement rates. Over the 3 years of the agreement, average annual compensation will increase from about $92,000 to $98,500 a year per person. Major changes were achieved in the health care insurance program. First, as of January 1, 2013, all members of the bargaining unit will transfer into a high-deductible health care savings account, HDHSA plan. The plan has projected average cost decreases of 7.3% a year over the contract period. The principal method of achieving these savings is a 33% higher deductible. Over the 3 years of the agreement, the average annual health care cost will decrease from about $18,000 to $14,300 per year. The underlying insurance contract is a 2-year agreement from January 1, 2013 to December 31, 2014, so there is a 6-month exposed tail on the back end, and up until the beginning of 2013, there is 6 months under the current agreement. Taken together, the annual cost per member will increase from about $110,000 to $112,800 over the 3 years. The board did not achieve any progress on pay for performance, nor were there any changes in hiring flexibility. The Board of Ed vote was 5-0 to recommend adoption of the agreement. Mike Botson, one of the no votes, expressed his concern that the negotiations failed to achieve compensation reductions being obtained in private industry, and that as a consequence, subsequent Board of Ed budgets would be exposed to BET and or RTM cost reductions, which could result in staff reductions. He believes that this effect is exacerbated by the fact that the contract savings are on the town side insurance budget and do not appear in the Board of Ed budget, which has only the compensation increases. The committee discussed recommending rejection of the agreement, sending it to arbitration, but the committee agreed with the Board of Ed negotiators that it is unlikely the town would achieve a better result from arbitration. The committee voted 10 in favor, 2 opposed, no abstentions to recommend adoption. Districts 2 and 10 voted no, agreeing with Mr. Botson that the agreement will result in layoffs. Several of us who voted yes also expressed the same concern. Thank you.
Thank you. And before getting our last report, I do have the result of the vote on item 4. This was the sense of the meeting resolution regarding election of moderator and moderator pro tem. Those in favor, 81, opposed 46, abstaining 13. That item is carried. Mr. Porter, Vice Chair of our Finance Committee, speaking on item 5.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Detson's comments and Mr. Brady's comments give you, I think, quantitatively a very good perspective of the benefits of this contract as negotiated. Since Gordon Ennis is not able to be here tonight, I think it's important and incumbent upon me to be sure that I reflect what his sense is and what the sense is of the Finance Committee with regard to the contract. And so I will actually quote from written comments that Gordon provided me, provided all of us, and then I will add some comments of my own, but I'll underline those of my own. The Finance Committee voted 12-0-0 in favor of the proposed GEA contract. We were benefited by having not only the group that was referred to previously that attended both of the meetings, but in addition, we had Larry Simon and Mike Mason. It is my understanding that though they were not actual participants in the negotiation, that they were on site and where it was prudent and appropriate for them to be engaged in discussions as resources for the negotiating team, they were on site. And the comprehension of the overall contract and certainly the town's budget and the implications of this with regard to the strategic direction that the Labor Contracts Committee and Mr. Cava and others, including the First Selectman and the Superintendent, have been on. That strategy was very much adhered to. And for those of you who are familiar with the negotiation process, it's a cooperative process. This is not a confrontational process. And so there were a number of things that clearly in the early discussion in the negotiations were left off the table. Mr. Ditson and Mr. Brady referred to several of those. Step changes, lane changes, many other things. The focus was on what it is we have been emphasizing as an RTM and what has been the strategy, given the fact that it was news to me that Greenwich always is first in the queue when it comes to this particular contract. So in addition to having our own self-serving interests relative to the negotiation, we also are setting a precedent for peer communities. And that has to be considered as well, because if you shoot yourself in the foot and you lose high-quality teachers because of the precedent you've set, that would be, I would categorize it as dumber than a doorknob. Now, having said that, for Mr. Ennis's part, he's not so much concerned about the proposed contract. He believes, and I believe as well, it will pass the RTM. But you could take away the message that because it was supported so fully by the other side of the negotiation, that perhaps some money was left on the table. The overwhelming vote of the teachers points to that. So it's a little difficult if we sit back and Monday morning quarterback to know what actually happened relative to the negotiation. And that's the reason that we have responsibility to make sure that we're well informed going in and that we have the data that we need and we provide the data to ourselves that is necessary in order for us to evaluate what the overall performance was of the negotiating team. Gordon's goal, and I fully support this, and my goal as vice chair, is to develop an efficient process or protocol to evaluate all labor contracts in town, not just the GEA agreement. And as a result of the hard work of members, including Mr. Ennis, bottom line is that there, as was referred to earlier, there is a new template that has been proposed, all boiled down to one page, that with further revision, further discussion, because this was entered into kind of after the negotiation was all over, it sets a precedent, in my judgment, Mr. Ennis's judgment, that could be very useful for us as we go forward. But it requires more work, more collaboration, more cooperation, and make sure that we've got the understanding and agreement that we need if we're going to use something like this as a basis for evaluating negotiating positions that we have and prospectively the other side might have. Relative to the template, it's also important for, we think, us to understand what, from a competitiveness point of view, the town's position is vis-a-vis other towns. You can hear, if you talk to the teachers directly, and particularly those that have left the Greenwich system, that the days of Greenwich being the panacea of where they want to work forever is not quite the same. They have concerns about quality of life of their families, and as a result, it's extremely difficult for our teachers to be in a position where they can enjoy the quality of life of living in Greenwich and teaching in Greenwich as well. And we need to be sensitive to that to make sure that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. Finally, we were told repeatedly that data that we requested to find was difficult to come by. And the work of the Finance Committee and its moles and gurus was such that the bottom line is that in a period of 3 or 4 days, the information that we put together in the template was developed. And so, as has been our practice for this Finance Committee, we continue to work to make sure that we understand all the tools that are available to us, number one, and number two, not only for this contract, but for other decision-making issues as well, that we're providing the information as a Finance Committee to you that will be helpful in you arriving at an appropriate decision. On that basis, I go back to what I started with, which is that the overall vote of the Finance Committee was fully in support of what had been done because of the strategic emphasis. We felt that they had accomplished their goals, and our vote was 12-0-0.
Thank you. Discussion on item 5. Jim Boutel, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, some statements have been made up forward that I want to address. Mr. Detchen, in his presentation on behalf of the Budget Overview Committee, focused on having an analysis that is, quote, better suited for financial analysis in terms of presenting you numbers. The report you just heard from the Finance Committee said basically the same thing. If you look at the financials, it's very clear that we went into a contract where we stressed reducing cost or controlling cost to the town. It's great if you're in manufacturing, folks, but these are our kids we're talking about. The first thing, let me say that this will be the 8th teacher's contract that I voted on in this body. We're not producing widgets in the school system. We have students. Nothing is more important to those kids' education than the members of this bargaining unit. Am I here arguing for more money? No. What I am saying is there's 2 things we go in to negotiate. One is cost, the other is work roles. As you've heard from the presentations tonight, and you can read in your explanos, any gains that we might have to work roles are the first thing that were tossed over the side in favor of our number 1 priority, controlling cost. I have a child in our school system at Coscott School. If we're going to abandon for the 3rd cycle in a row performance pay as one of the first items over the side, one of the things that wasn't mentioned in any of the presentations is initially the town sought additional work days, but the superintendent had announced his resignation mid-negotiation since he was leaving, and it was something that Sid wanted, and the negotiators, quote-unquote, didn't really understand what the purpose was. I would say extra work days would absolutely affect the quality of our child's education. The ability to hire outside of the normal wage scale. The town sought the ability that if there is a shortage of science teachers and we want to go hire the best possible science teacher for Greenwich, we are not limited to the pay scale. We can go outside of the pay scale when there's a defined shortage. Didn't get it. The only single item we got that will have any impact as a result of this contract on performance in the classroom is a minuscule increase in the amount of training funds available. From my perspective, before everybody walks away from here saying that the RTM got what they wanted zeros, they wanted reduced cost. I'm one RTM member. Going into the next cycle, I want a contract that's going to improve teacher performance, student performance, and the overall performance of our school system.
Further discussion on item 5. Dr. Carl Carlson, District 1.
He's got a button on.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM,
Some comments that were made here tonight caused me to reflect on my seat about a comment made by a colleague of mine a few days ago to me. A colleague says to me, do people look outside the windows that they have? Meaning, what's going on in the world today? I think it is just about a month ago that Dr. Bernanke of the Federal Reserve announced that he would have unprecedented low interest rates, not only for the next year, but for the next 2 years. That is an indication that he expects deflation to be with us. I just don't mean CPI inflation, which is somewhat distorted, because you're dealing with a great deflationary phenomenon coming out of housing. And we've been in deflation now for 3 years, as I see it. And watching of what the Federal Reserve is doing and an understanding of it suggests that what's been going on by the Federal Reserve for the last 3 years is they've been fighting deflation. Our teachers had 3.5% increases during those 3 years. I'm very concerned about the wage part of this contract, the 2.31%, 2.5%. I've heard statements here tonight about retaining teachers. From the news that I've been hearing is that teachers have been fired. I've been a critic of spending in terms of the schools, or rather, it's really not spending, it's the rate of growth of the spending vis-a-vis the inflation. And the benefit of this would have been through the years is if that we got into real trouble, we wouldn't be firing teachers. It is fundamentally positive for the schools. But I would like to suggest to you that we're at a point of inflection right now about whether we're going to have a double dip recession. And the whole phenomenon will then look like a depression, or we're going to avoid it. A contract like this that looks out over a few years, that we really don't know what it's going to come to, should have been a bit more conservative. And I'd like to suggest to you that we do not try to continue doing business as we did a half a dozen years ago. We're in a very different world. The phenomenon of the country of Greece, which is certainly de facto bankrupt, and perhaps there are a couple more, we have to do things quite differently. And I'm afraid that this contract does not measure up to those standards. Thank you.
Further discussion on item 5. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 5, and proceed to poll your delegation. That being the last item on our agenda, we will await the result of that vote before proceeding to adjourn. I would like to make one announcement I forgot at the beginning of the meeting. We are in the process of naming, I am in the process of naming the RTM liaisons to the, what do we call that, capital improvement, CIP committee. And we have been well served the past many years by Josh Brown and Bob Brady. Bob Brady, as you know, will not be continuing on the RTM next term, and so I'm looking for someone to replace Bob. I'm grateful that Josh Brown has agreed to continue his service as a liaison. So I ask if anyone is interested in serving as liaison for the RTM, along with Mr. Brown, to the CIP committee, that you please contact me, because I would like to name that person in the very near future. So I ask that the district chairs expedite the voting on this remaining item, and as I said, we will await the result before proceeding to adjourn. I have the result of the vote on item 5, the teacher contract. Those in favor, 124, opposed 12, abstaining 7. That item has carried. That being the final item on our agenda, absent objection, this meeting stands adjourned upon unanimous consent. Thank you all for coming back. Have a safe trip home.